Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Just take a second and think about the brands you see around your house every single day. The flour in your kitchen, the soap in your bathroom, maybe even the notebook your kids are using for school. They're just there. Part of our daily lives, right? I'm talking about Ashirvad Atta, Fiyama shower gels, Classmate notebooks. They all feel like these separate, specialized brands that are absolute pros at what they do. And you'd think they have nothing to do with each other. But what if I told you that's not the whole story? Well, because they are. Every single one of those brands, and a whole lot more, are all part of the massive ITC empire, a company that actually started its journey over 100 years ago as the Imperial Tobacco Company. And honestly, this is one of the most incredible, most paradoxical stories in business today. Okay, so let's get right into it. Because at the very core of ITC is this huge contradiction, this paradox, that makes it a total puzzle for investors, but an absolute powerhouse for consumers like you and me. We are going to unpack the great ITC paradox. Now, on the surface, if you just look at where their money comes from, ITC looks pretty well diversified. You see that cigarettes make up less than half of their total revenue. The rest? Well, it's from that huge consumer goods business, or FMCG, we just talked about, plus things like paper, agriculture, and hotels. It looks like a modern, balanced company, right? But here, this is where it gets crazy. Look at where the profit comes from. That cigarette division, with less than half the sales, pulls in a staggering 80%, let me repeat, 80% of the company's entire profit. And that massive FMCG business? It brings in just 10%. So let's be crystal clear. The cigarette business is the giant cash engine that funds absolutely everything else. So what do you do with all that cash? Well, if you're ITC, you go on a 2-decade-long mission to build a consumer brand empire, pretty much from scratch. Let's just take a look at the insane scale of what they've managed to create. In your kitchen, they are an absolute beast. Ashirvad is the name in flour and spices. Sunfeast goes head-to-head with the biggest biscuit makers out there. Yippee Noodles took on a virtual monopoly and carved out a huge slice of the market for itself. And that's before we even mention Bingo Chips or B Natural Juices. I mean, the list just keeps going. And it doesn't stop at food, not by a long shot. In personal care, you've got Fiyama, Vivel, and Engage deodorants. They bought the classic brand Savlon and just completely supercharged it. And of course, when it comes to stationery, Classmate is the undisputed king of notebooks in India. They just keep building these category-leading brands one after another. Now, this kind of success is no accident. They have a very clear playbook. First, whatever category they enter, they are aiming to be number 1 or number 2. No messing around. Second, and this is the genius part, they use their century-old cigarette distribution network, which literally reaches every little town and village in India, to push all these new products. And third, they almost always go for a premium position, focusing on top-notch quality. So that's the brand strategy. But how do you actually manage a shift this massive? Building brands is one thing, but transforming a tobacco company into an FMCG giant? That takes some seriously impressive long-term vision and just flawless execution. And believe me, this has been a slow, patient, and deliberate game plan playing out over decades. You look back to the 90s, they were basically just a cigarette company. Then, in the 2000s, they started dipping their toes into diversification, launching their first big FMCG brands. By the 2010s, they were on a roll building and buying brands, all leading up to this incredibly audacious goal: 1 lakh crore in FMCG revenue by the year 2030. And if you want to see their entire playbook summed up in one perfect little story, there's no better example than what they did with the classic antiseptic brand Savlon. So back in 2015, ITC bought the Savlon brand from Johnson & Johnson for about 180 crores. Now, at the time, everyone knew Savlon. It was respected, but let's just say it was a little sleepy, maybe a bit forgotten. Then ITC takes over. They plug it into that incredible distribution network. They launch a whole wave of new products like hand washes and sanitizers. And by 2021, its revenue had exploded to over 1,200 crore rupee. Just let that sink in for a moment. An 18 times increase in revenue in only 6 years. It is the perfect illustration of their ability to spot a brand with good potential and turn it into an absolute modern-day powerhouse. And this isn't just a lucky break. It's all backed by incredibly solid financial management. For anyone who follows the markets, these numbers are key. 101% cash conversion basically means every single ruby of profit they claim is real cash in the bank. And to keep margins and returns that high while growing so fast, well, that's just a sign of world-class execution. So you put all of this together, this strange mix of a super profitable but declining old business and a fast-growing but less profitable new one, and it creates this fascinating dilemma. How should any of us, investors, analysts, or just curious people, think about where ITC is headed? Because look, there are some serious challenges ahead. That 80% dependency on cigarette profits is a huge risk, especially when governments are always hiking taxes on tobacco. And on top of that, the FMCG world is brutally competitive, and the profit margins are way lower than what they're used to from the cigarette business. This really leaves you with two totally different ways to look at the company. For a value investor, it's a dream come true. You've got this reliable cash cow in the cigarette business that pays out steady dividends, all while funding the future. But for a growth investor, the real excitement, the real story, is the FMCG side. This huge, diversified consumer goods company that could have decades of growth still ahead of it. And that right there is the ultimate question. Is ITC a relic from a bygone era, using its controversial legacy to build a brighter, cleaner future? Or is it simply a modern-day consumer giant being built on a foundation of smoke? The answer to that question is going to define one of the biggest corporate stories in India for the next decade. Thanks for watching The Explainer.